G'day folks, thanks for tuning in. In today's video we're going to look at how to paint skin tones, specifically human skin tones, using oil paints. Now for better or worse, there's no shortage of scantily clad miniatures out there, and I thought that these Khorne linemen from Games Workshop's Blood Bowl would be a decent candidate for this topic. I've already painted the rest of them up so we can focus on the skin. I did this about a week ago, and now that they're dry, I don't have to worry about disturbing the work that's already been done. We're going to explore a few different approaches, ranging from simple to a little more advanced, to give you some options and to show you some of the possibilities. A lot of folks find skin tones to be daunting due to how diverse and complex they can be, so I'm going to try to break it down a bit today. Broadly speaking, skin has two components: complexion, which is how light or dark it is, and undertone, which is how warm or cool it is. And using these two principles, we can create a whole range of skin tones with just our primary colours and a bit of practice. Now if this seems a bit much and you're used to painting skin tones with one or two pre-made colours, then don't worry, because we're also going to look at some quick and easy combinations using earth tones and a bit of colour theory. We're also going to lean heavily into the strengths of oils, that is their blending properties and long working time, to try to capture some of the more complex and subtle aspects of skin with comparatively little effort. But before we get started, I wanted to take a minute to address why we're doing things this way as opposed to relying on pre-mixed colours like those we could find in hobby acrylic. The simplest reason is that they generally don't exist. Hobby paints like these are specifically formulated with our fantasy worlds in mind. I've mentioned in other videos that you're not going to find dwarf big toe or high elf earlobe in oils, but I find that to be a good thing for several reasons. One of the problems I have with these sort of paints is that no matter the maker, until very recently, paints labelled as flesh tones, be it human or human adjacent, tend to cater to a specific pigmentation. Anything that you might want to use as a skin tone that isn't at this end of things is typically named after something inanimate, monstrous, or otherwise inhuman. And it's the same with these contrast paints up here. Aside from being problematic in of itself, it can be confusing for those looking to paint skin tones outside of that range. So instead let's take a look at all these paints to see what they have in common. This pale flesh is quite a light and desaturated pink. This Kislev flesh is less pink and more yellow, but similarly desaturated. Even as we go darker, these tones are all fairly desaturated, with brown itself being a generally desaturated orange or red. For example, the Cygor brown, as dark as it is still quite red. So this is the kind of thing we want to keep in mind when creating skin tones. We want them to be largely desaturated regardless of complexion, and we want them to have some sort of undertone, be it warm, cool, or something in between, to give our desaturated colour just a bit of life. So let's get started. So our first combination is going to be one of my quick and easy go-tos for lighter skin. I like to keep this Terra Rosa or red earth on hand, and we can see by the pigment information that it's pigment red 101. It's also opaque by the black box, which means it'll cover very well. In addition to being a wonderful earth tone, it's a great foundation for many skin tones, by being a nice warm brown with a red undertone. To highlight it, we can use something like this brilliant yellow pale, which if you've seen my other videos you'll know I'm a big fan of too. Conversely, if you're looking for a darker complexion, something like asphaltum would be a good candidate, as it's that same pigment red 101 with a bit of black in it. In either case, you could use something like this radiant violet to also highlight, as it would bring out a more reddish undertone than the brilliant yellow pale, while being relatively cool due to the blue in it. But enough talking, let's see them in action. I have a slightly smaller and less beat up round brush than usual, as I'm trying to minimise the amount of this I get on my finished parts. That said, a bit of thinner on a brush or cotton swab could easily clean up any overspill. So we'll take a bit of Terra Rosa here for starters, and apply it like we normally do, not using a lot of paint or thinner, just enough to make sure it adheres smoothly. You'll see it's quite orange, and not looking very much like skin at this stage, but remember that we will be blending as we build on it. The same will be true as the asphaltum when we get to it. We're looking to establish a foundation here, and these colours will influence but not be the final result. If you've seen my other videos, you'll know I like to wipe away this initial foundational layer using a makeup sponge, so that we're left with a very thin hint of that which will influence our subsequent layers. Now wiping it away can also be handy if you're into speed painting, as you can get a quick value sketch across what you remove and what you leave behind. Now this doesn't make him look any less like an Oompa Loompa, but it can be a winner for other colours and combinations. So now I'm going to take a small filbert brush and a bit of that brilliant yellow pale and mix it in. You can see right away on the palette that we've got a warm pinkish light skin tone, just from those two colours alone. And if I brush it over the top of him, letting the brush catch on those raised edges, he's suddenly looking more human. And the Terra Rosa that's underneath is also looking a lot more natural. So again, if you're batch painting a group of lighter skinned folks and you wanted an easy starting point, you could do a lot worse than this combination. In just a couple of minutes I got a pretty convincing result with some nice smooth blends. The yellow in our highlight colour is preventing things from going too white, and the subtle red undertones are keeping him full of life. You can get a bit of diversity just by mixing the ratios of these two colours alone. And if I wanted to go lighter, I could just add more brilliant yellow pale. And while it may look too light on the palette, as it blends in on the Mini, it'll come back down, giving us even more room for additional highlights. And we can also easily get some more interest and variety going with some other colours, which I'll show you shortly. Now we'll try it with the asphaltum. And again, we can thank all the red in this brown for giving us a suitable lively undertone for our skin. If you wanted an even darker starting point, you could use something like Van Dyke Brown or Burnt Umber. However, pay attention to the pigments, particularly in your Van Dyke Brown, as for example Winsor & Newton's artist grade version is a fair bit warmer than Gamblin's, which is a lot more neutral. Undertones can also be cooler, taking on a bluer or more purple hue, which, if you don't have a suitable brown available, you could still create using those colours. So when we talk about undertones, we're talking about temperature, how warm or cool our underlying blood vessels, veins and so on appear, as well as how our environment, such as the light we're in and the clothes we wear, influence the look of our skin. If you were to really look at your skin right now, and I mean really study it, it probably doesn't look quite how you'd normally describe it, due to those factors. This is why I think it's a bit silly to get too hung up on creating an exact colour, particularly in miniature, unless you were trying to replicate a specific reference. Of course, his gnarly looking face mask is going to obstruct things a bit, but thankfully he's got plenty more skin to demonstrate on. As before, I can use my makeup sponge to take more of this excess away. You can see the light primer is giving us again more of that value sketch, but it's also lightened his overall look considerably, so again it just depends on what you're going for. But even if this were over black primer, having less on the raised areas would give our highlight colour more potency when it comes time to add it. Now let's instead come in with our radiant violet. The violet is going to desaturate some, as purple is complementary to yellow, and when the purple in the violet meets the yellow in the brown, they'll cancel each other out somewhat. But this is a good thing, because if we were to use brilliant yellow pale, it may end up looking a little too yellow overall. That's not to say I couldn't use it, but like always I want to show you some options. And you can see that if I do add it, the result is quite similar, but different enough that I could use this in various places to create a bit of interest without spoiling the overall look. As much as we characterise skin tones by colour, they do tend to be quite desaturated. If your Mini is looking a little unnatural, there's a good chance it's due to an excess of saturation, which you can easily correct by adding a bit of that colour's complement. Now I feel it's getting a bit too light for what I'm trying to demonstrate, but that's easy enough to correct just by introducing a bit of asphaltum to knock it down a bit. You can see how easy it is to just keep going back and forth like this with oils. But to show you more of that versatility, let's put some of that Terra Rosa on the football again and instead highlight it with Radiant Violet. And if things start to look a bit messy, we can use a clean round dry brush as a blending brush and gently tap that transition in to get a nice smooth gradient. We can also do this on the skin. I go into blending brushes more in my other colour theory videos, so if you'd like to know more about it, please check those out. So just by using these two pairs of colours, we get the basis of a large variety of skin tones. But what if we wanted to take it a bit further? Because as easy as this was, they're still looking a bit flat. Take this first fella for example. His face is looking a bit samey, especially compared to the rest of him. So there are a few things we can do. We could take a tiny bit of red and add that to our mix, and just a touch of that to his cheeks and nose and anywhere we think that the blood would be closer to the surface, like his knuckles, elbows, and so on. I'm not looking to give him rouge, though you could definitely use this technique to apply makeup effects. I'm just looking to get a bit more life into him. In either case, I find makeup guides to be an incredibly useful resource when exploring skin tones, as those folks really have complexion and undertones largely figured out, and makeup swatches can be a great reference for colour matching. Likewise with shadows, we can add a little bit of blue, just the tiniest amount. And again, we trust the process and tap it in with our blending brush. Suddenly we've got some 5 o'clock shadow, which we could then extend up around the top of his head. With acrylic you could spend a lot of time glazing this in, but with oils we can just straight up incorporate it. And if we go too far, then we can just correct in the other direction. Now you could also use oils to glaze with, and I often do, but here again I'm just trying to show you some options. And I'd be remiss in not thanking James Wapple, the oil father, for putting me onto not only these combinations, but oils in general. I highly recommend you go and check out him on either YouTube, Twitch, or Patreon. I realise I'm getting a bit carried away here, but skin tones can be a lot of fun to explore and experiment with. You could spend quite a lot of time refining this, and I encourage you to do so, but to give this video a reasonable length, I'll next move on to more advanced techniques. If you wanted to see more of what I'm covering today, I keep real-time footage of this and many of my other videos over on my Patreon. There you can vote on future content, get early access to videos, and more, and the support there really helps me continue to produce content like this, which I greatly appreciate. Now I want to shift gears to creating our own skin tones using colours that you could commonly find in any starter set. You can generally count on getting most of these: titanium white, cadmium yellow, cadmium red, French ultramarine blue, and burnt umber. If you're using student grade paints, you need to be mindful of their limitations, particularly with reds and yellows, as they won't be as potent as some of the artist grade equivalents, especially those that use cadmium. But this doesn't mean we can't get a good result with them. If we start by taking a little bit of everything, then right away we have a very nice looking brown. This might be a bit too desaturated for skin, but it makes for a good starting point. We could add more white to bring it up to more of a light colour, or to get a preview of what it might look like highlighted. But if we were to add just a bit of red and yellow to that same mix, we could see how much it's shifting. And again, a bit of white will further accentuate that. And if you've gone too far in one direction, we just add a little more of the other to bring it back. If you're not sure what your colours are doing, you can always add more white just to bring the value up to make it easier to read. So here I want to add a bit of red, but that's way too much. So I can put a bit more blue in there to cool it back down. But now it's too purple, so I can add yellow, its complement, to bring it back towards neutral. Under the right lighting conditions, most of these would be passable as skin tones, though they could definitely do with some further refinement. I'm mostly trying to show you how easy it is to experiment and get close with not a lot of effort. So let's try some of that here. It's a little bit ashen, so a bit of umber will give it some warmth back, and a bit of blue to then darken it. Too much blue, a bit of yellow, we're getting closer. I'm not trying to recreate the first two skin tones, but to give us something different here. And nothing's stopping you from starting with something that doesn't look quite right like this and adjusting it as you go in the context of the mini. Just ask yourself what colour it's looking too much like, and then add that complement to bring it back, keeping your desired undertone in mind. As you can see, this technique is much more involved than the last, but even more versatile once you get the hang of it. I'm not quite used to this particular cadmium-free red, and I've been using my go-to combos for way too long, but we're all learning together, and I think it's important that you see the process. Some more blue in the shadows is always a safe bet, and of course for our stubble. But again, human skin tones are beautiful, and the variety of hues and colours that go into them really present us with so much opportunity as artists. And I haven't touched on other palettes that could also be used to make skin tones. If you search YouTube for skin tones, particularly with oil paints, you'll see all sorts of incredible things that canvas artists can do. It could easily be translated down to our scale if you're looking to explore this further. The thing with oils is that you're never so far gone that you can't get back to where you want to be. I also recommend having some reference material handy to make your life easier. And if you're coming from acrylic, even trying to colour match those paints that you're used to could be a great learning experience. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a video on colour matching in the future. You'll notice with this approach that I'm not tethering myself to one scheme or set of colours. Instead, I had the freedom to make my skin tones whatever I want, and even if I apply the same foundation across several miniatures, with this method I could easily make them all distinct from each other with subtle changes either to my shadow or highlights. I think part of what makes skin so challenging is that in addition to being so diverse and complex, we're wired to see more than a material, we see a person. And it can be hard to just look at even your own skin and ask yourself, what am I actually seeing here in terms of colour that I can try to recreate? I find it can help to break things down further by asking, how is the tip of the nose different from the cheek or the shoulder? To try to turn your brain off and listen with your eyes instead. And I find having a focused palette like this can really help facilitate that. Thankfully, oils make it really easy to incorporate a lot of these subtleties. We could take the same concepts that gave us the flushed cheeks and the 5 o'clock shadow and use them for other subcutaneous effects. Or go in the other direction and capture the environment that our mini is occupying. Of course, like with every topic we explore, you can take this as far as you want, but don't feel restrained just because it sounds complicated. Give it a go and I think you'll surprise yourself. There's so much going on with skin, it's quite hard to mess up once you've got your primary tones established, and it can be quite fun sneaking in various hues for some added interest. And if things ever do get a bit messy, remember that your blending brush is always there to help smooth out those transitions and make your shifts a little more subtle. I'd like to have shown you some women along with these fellas, but unfortunately the standard team box only comes with men. Games Workshop does sell an expansion pack through Forge World, where you can get 2 women in a pack of 4 models for nearly the cost of the entire base team of 12. This is a bizarre practice that Ogre players are familiar with, so unfortunately we'll have to wait for a future video. And so here we have 4 examples of some quick and easy skin tones, 2 of which with a simple combination of an earth tone and a highlight, and 2 from a focused palette of primary colours, some brown and some white. Both methods are totally viable. If you're new to oils and or skin tones, then maybe start with the first, but I strongly recommend at least trying the second, as you may surprise yourself with what you can come up with. And again, this isn't counting the numerous other approaches to painting skin out there, some of which I may cover in a future video. And here they are a few days later, once the skin is dried, and with those other details tightened up a bit. You can see a lot of the shine has died down, but if I wanted to make it even more matte, I could use an appropriate acrylic varnish. So thank you very much for spending time with me here today. This one was a lot of fun, and I hope you found it interesting and are keen to try it yourself. Special thanks to my patrons, especially those whose names are showing up on screen, as their support really helps me create this kind of content. If you'd like to consider signing up for my Patreon, there'll be a link down in the description. If you have any questions about any of the products or techniques I've used today, or would like to share your own experiences in creating skin tone or the palettes that you've used, I'd love to read about it in the comments. So thanks again for your company, and take care.